What's up everybody, welcome back. So we are going to continue our procedural aiming system and we're going to add sway to the weapon using the same system. So currently we have a little idle animation playing, but we can achieve the same effect using the system we added in the previous video, and I'm going to show you how you can do that. For this we're going to use a curve. So first let's create a curve. If we right click and go to the, let's see, where was it again? Miscellaneous, I think. Yeah, there we have the curve option. So select curve and we want to create a curve vector. Select that one. Now I'm going to call this a rifle way curve. And let's open it. And how are we going to use this? We're going to make a graph in here. So if we right click, we can add a key. You'll see it adds a key over here and we can drag it around. So this should give us 3 different keys to play around with. So there we have it. We have the red, the blue and the green lines, so they represent the axis. We are going to move the gun around. We have the X, the Z and the Y axis. This is going to move the gun left to right. Z is going to move it up and down, and Y is going to move it back and forward. So we're going to play around with this. So let's add another key, right click somewhere without having something selected, and we can do add key. And now we can make a curve in here. So first of all, let's get the x-axis and let's move the gun left to right. So we don't really want to move it a whole lot, to be honest. So let's select one key. And I'm gonna drag it up, let's say somewhere around 0.6 maybe. That should be good, I think. And we want to make it a nice slow movement, so I'm going to drag it way to the right. Let's make it 1.5 seconds. And over here we're going to add another key. So deselect everything, right click and add a key. And I'm going to make it move back down. I only want the red one. So we're going to move it all the way down to minus 0.6. And we're going to put that at the 3 mark over here. So we have a nice even curve. And now we want to add another key over here and move it back up to the 0 line. And that's going to be at the 4.5 mark. So we have a nice repeating curve over here. Now let's see. I want to move the gun up and down as well. So let's make sure we start at 0, and I'm going to drag this one down. So let's make the up and down movement a little bit less, so I'm going to stick it around 0.4 and have a little bit of different timing, so we have a little bit of offset in the graphs, so it isn't as repetitive. So let's say somewhere in between 1 and 1.5. So where we at? 1.2, so we need this to be a 2.4 somewhere, and we have a value of 0.55. That's a bit much maybe, so go around 0.4, 0.4, 2.4, and let's move it back down to the 0 line at around 3.6. That should be over here. And now, do we want to move the gun back and forward? Well, maybe a little bit, but not too much, I think. So let's just add a little bit of movement in here. Something like this. So are we back at 0? This is too much. So this should be 0. So we have 3 different graphs over here. I'm going to click on one, right click and go post extract, and I'm going to make it cycle. So now it's just going to repeat itself forever. And I'm going to do the same for the other 2 graphs. So post extract cycle, and the red one as well, post extract cycle. So if we start at 0, we don't need to worry about anything negative over here. We could add a pre-X trap and make it cycle in the minus area as well, but we don't need it. So now let's smooth the curve a little bit. So I'm just going to select everything over here, and if I click the third button over here, that's going to make a little nice smooth movements in our graph. So let's see how this looks if we apply this to our gun, and we can make adjustments if we want to later. So let's just save this, and I'm going to close it down and open my first person character blueprint. And I'm going to look for the event tick, and I don't think we have it in here yet, so let's add it. Now first we need to get our curve in here, so I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm going to call this rifle sway curve. For the variable type, I'm going to make this a curve vector, and it's going to be an object reference. And then if we compile it, we can give it a default, and that's going to be our rifle sway curve. So make sure you put it in here. We're going to compile and save this. And now let's apply this to the weapon. So I think I'm going to apply it only when I'm not aiming. So when I'm hip firing, or when I'm idle at a hip position, I want the sway to be active. And when I'm aiming, I'm going to be aiming dead centered. So I'm not going to apply any sway to that. So first I'm going to check if I have my aim button pressed. And if not, I'm gonna look up my curve value. So let's drag in the curve, hold control, drag it in, and I'm gonna do a get value. And we want to get the get vector value, and we need to insert a time in here as well. So we could simply do something like the game time, or the time the character is alive, or something like that. Because we made the curve go on endlessly, it doesn't matter at what time we are. So we need a timer that keeps running. So let's just get game time and plug it in here. That should work. And we get our vector value, and I'm simply gonna promote this to a variable, and I'm gonna call this the weapon sway vector. And plug this into the false pin, just like this. Now if I'm ADSing, I want it to be dead centered, but I need to reset this to 0. So I'm actually gonna end up with the sights in the center of the screen. But if I'm gonna instantly set it to 0, we might get a little bit of hiccup, so I'm gonna interp it. So let's look for the interp. And I'm gonna interp a vector, so we need to v-interp 2. And we're gonna interp from our weapon sway vector to 0, so that's fine, we can leave that in here. We're gonna plug the delta time into the delta time and set the interp speed to something about 10 maybe. And then make sure we save this as our new weapon sway vector and plug it in the true pin. So that's gonna make it go smoothly back to the centered position if we are aiming. And we are done in the character blueprint, so we can save and close this down. And now if we go to the animation blueprint, we can add it in here. So let's start it at the event graph. And I'm gonna simply get the sway vector for my character and save it in a variable here as well. So get a weapon sway vector. I'm gonna promote this to a variable. Again, the weapon sway vector. And plug this in. And now all we need to do in the animation graph is make a little bit of room after the transform modify bone. And we are simply going to duplicate this one. So I'm going to copy this and connect it up. So let's see, we are not going to replace existing, but we're going to add to existing for both the rotation and the translation, although we are only using translation, to be honest. So we could pretty much disable the other one as well. Well, it doesn't really matter. So we're going to plug in the weapon sway in here. Come on. So that should do it, I think. So if we compile and save this now and make sure, I'm going to disconnect my state machine and plug in the pose animation. So I'm not playing any idle animations. And let's see what happens. Where's my viewport? So there we have our weapon sway. So this is not the idle animation I was playing before. You can see it's moving around a bit faster as well. And a bit more randomly. And we can play around with the curve to make it look less random or more random or bigger movements or smoother movements. It's just what you want. So if I ADS, the sway disappears and the aiming is centered back to the screen. And it's pretty smooth, so that's why we interpolated it. So that's pretty much all there is to adding the sway, and obviously you could do things like keep it in ADS, and you can set the alpha of the sway in here. So for instance, if you're moving slowly, you might want to set the alpha down so there's less sway, and if you start moving faster, you can increase the alpha and there's more sway. If you're aiming down sights, you could turn this down, so maybe have a little bit of sway in ADS, and you can modify all of it. So that's why we're adding a second node just for that separately. Okay, so I think we covered pretty much all there is for adding sway. In the next one we're going to do recoil, so that's going to be an interesting one. Thanks for watching, guys. Talk to you later.